Hi all, welcome to this SIGCHI 2024 talk about the content moderation policies of platforms that host user content. It's titled, Community Guidelines Make This the Best Party on the Internet, an in-depth study of online platforms' content moderation policies. This was conducted by an ensemble of researchers from the University of Chicago. The Internet is far from its age of plain text messaging. Online content takes many forms and operates at increasing scales. For example, this screen capture of Twitch shows a mix of media types with hierarchies of users, nested levels of video content, several languages are present, and this is accompanied by increases in both users and time spent interacting with user-generated content. So there's lots of content out there and it's complex. Who's going to moderate all of it? First, do governments define what is and is not allowed online? Section 230 is often said to be the law that allowed the internet to flourish and grow as it did, by not overly burdening platforms with content they didn't create, but were just hosting. The many tensions at play here have been discussed to a large extent, but the outcome has been that no major US laws provide how-tos for platforms to moderate content. It has become a matter of, if a platform acts in good faith to a reasonable extent to remove the worst stuff, then they won't be held liable for everything else on their platform. And this is not the only way it's done worldwide, of course. Just to give one more example for the sake of showing a small piece of the variety and relevant legal systems, in Germany, there are laws that specifically oblige platforms to remove illegal content or face fines, and they have accompanying laws that outline more specifically what categories of speech fit within legal and illegal boundaries. This is in contrast to the rules for where most of the platforms we study are based, which is in the United States, where in many cases the government does not define what is allowed, the platforms do. And so platforms have implicitly become de facto regulators of almost all possible forms of human interaction online for major portions of the internet. This is especially true in the US, which remains as the main scope for the work. And this begs the question, how do the platforms govern themselves? And to dive into this landscape, we took the following approach. We sought to gather and analyze the policies that the platforms have created to moderate the content on their sites. We focus on three popular moderation topics, each with different groundings in legal structures in the United States. First, we have copyright, which is well structured, it's well established. The Digital Millennium Copyright Act in the United States outlines in detail the legal considerations and responsibilities of platforms and users with respect to hosting potentially infringing material. We then looked at hate speech moderation, which itself can be more nuanced. Hate speech faces challenges to moderation by being harder to pin down at times. There are some specific laws exist in the United States that touch on similar issues, but nothing that covers general hateful speech on the internet. We also looked at misinformation, which can be nuanced and often lacks consensus. There are some edge case laws, but nothing close to the boilerplate specifics that outline, for example, copyright infringement. And these topics allowed us to focus on three relatively siloed areas that are each rooted in different levels of legal structures and have reached public attention at different recencies. So here's what we did. We took the top 200 most popular sites as ranked by Chenhao, and we filtered for the ones that have user-generated content. So these are sites that host content that's made by users. And this resulted in these 43 websites. And for each of these sites, we looked at the three moderation topics: copyright infringement, hate speech, and misinformation. And for each of these sites and each of these topics, we collected, annotated, and analyzed the relevant policy text. Some past work has mostly focused on one topic or one site, but looking at many sites and multiple topics gives us a broader view of the state of content moderation for these major platforms. This collect, annotate, and analyze methodology leads straight into our main contributions, where in summary, we developed a pipeline for finding and scraping relevant content moderation policy text from the platforms. You can check out the paper for more details on the scraper and pipeline. I'll leave out those details from the presentation. We then developed an annotation scheme and annotated our dataset of content moderation policies. We then conducted some analysis of the annotated dataset to glean insights about the state of moderation from the internet's largest host of user content. For example, we found that platforms tended to explain their moderation criteria via examples rather than explicit definitions. Let's look at these in a bit more detail. So first, we created and annotated this large data set of policy text pertaining to copyright, misinformation, and hate speech for the largest platforms that host user-generated content. Here's an excerpt from the dataset showing a subset of the annotation scheme. First, let's look at a few of the labels we applied. We iteratively constructed the annotation scheme to refer to the different major components that policies can contain. For example, we have justification for labels. We have justification labels for why a platform has a policy, and moderation criteria labels for when certain policies apply, as well as its more granular subcategories. We also include structural labels like signpost, applied when policy text is referring to or pointing the reader to information elsewhere. The full codebook can be found in the paper. And returning to this passage shows us an example of how the codebook can be used. The first sentence provides justification for the platform's moderation policy on the basis of community values. And the next sentence provides an exception to the more general rule of its moderation, followed by a signpost link to read more. The policy then outlines the criteria for moderation, first with an example and then some definitions. And so we did this for all of the relevant policy passages, resulting in quite a large data set of annotated policy text. It includes over 1,300 annotated policy pages, over 11,000 annotated segments, and that's over 1.4 million annotated characters. As you can see, this took a lot of manual effort from a team of 4 annotators. But this result is a powerful dataset. Annotation at this scale enables interesting analysis of the current state of content moderation, which brings me to the analysis part of our contribution. Here I will show a select few of the questions we were able to answer through analysis of the dataset. First, why did platforms say they moderated content? We thought of this as the platforms providing justification for their stated policies. And the results match expectations. Copyright infringement policies cite legal justifications. In other areas where laws are less present, platforms look to upholding standards and values. For example, on Tumblr.com, their hate and harassment policy gives this justification. Our users, as decent human beings, don't like that kind of thing. What about after content is flagged for potential moderation? When do platforms take a deeper look? For copyright, platforms play a small role in simply making sure requests meet the requirements. But as shown in this excerpt from GitHub's policy, the tough decisions are reserved for the other parties involved. GitHub is the judge. It is up to the parties and their lawyers. As for harmful speech and misinformation, intent and context are often necessary for making the right call. And this investigation is typically done so by the platform. Specific instances of content moderation may be inconsistent with a platform's stated policies or user expectations, leading users to potentially seek rollback of moderation. We look to see when this was possible. Most instances of appealing policies were for copyright infringement, and as you can see, the DMCA provides specific forms that users can submit to contest moderation. But when it comes to hate speech and misinformation, there's little users can concretely do. As you can see with this quote from Fandom, your only remedy with respect to any dissatisfaction with the services was to terminate your account. And this imbalance suggests that more work may need to be done to help users know what actions they can take if they feel their content has been unfairly moderated as harmful or misleading. This work has a number of implications for the different stakeholders involved. First, for regulators, there is a difficulty in locating policy text, let alone interpreting it. This points to a need for dialogue between platforms and regulators to agree upon standardization around content moderation policy. Standard locations for policies, as well as maybe even machine-readable policies, could make it easier for regulators to check that stated policies comply with the laws of a particular region. In its current state, it's difficult to know if platforms are following their policies or their laws if they do exist. As for platforms, This is the first such dataset of policy text from an array of different platforms. Our work might help them analyze their own policies in the context of the wider industry. Finally, for researchers, there are a number of possible takeaways and possible extensions. Our pipeline and scraper could be used to expand our dataset for additional types of platforms, such as news sites around the world, or reconfigured to focus on additional content moderation topics like how do platforms regulate AI-generated content. Our current findings provide a comprehensive high-level overview of why, when, and how platforms moderate, but additional insights could be extracted from the dataset as well. For instance, future studies could further contrast moderation policies for different types of users. Think about New York Times. They have policies specifically for journalists, advertisers, in addition to regular users, all of whom use the platform in different ways and are governed in unique ways. Or maybe there are some ways to explore annotation improvement. It is unfortunate that so much manual work has to be done in order to do an overdue study like this one. LLMs seem to be the current likely candidate for these types of studies. One final note, our dataset is public. You can find it at this link or use this QR code. The link is also in the paper. And we try to make it as easy to use as possible. There's a dataset guide on the website. And for example, with this dataset, you could ask, what does TikTok do about misinformation? And find that when it comes to the elections, they may not take action on content if it's deemed newsworthy. So in this study, we looked at what platforms report they do, and the next steps are to see if they actually do it. Thank you for your time.